3:42 a.m. February 18th, 2026, Yuma, Arizona. 22 ATF agents and a joint federal task force breached the perimeter of an industrial warehouse off Avenue B inside the bay. 340 military-grade drone components staged for export at sunrise. Estimated retail value by Defense Logistics Agency cost codes $97 million. Manifested destination Dubai. Actual destination Iran. The shipping paperwork said agricultural sensors. The crates contained encrypted flight controllers, gimbal stabilizers, and targeting modules pulled directly from American military supply chains, components that should have been logged into a sealed depot at Fort Huachuca 4 months earlier. They had never arrived. This was the end of a federal investigation that began with one number on one spreadsheet. A single inventory mismatch flagged by a supply sergeant who refused to sign off on it. What he found pulled the lid off a diversion network that had been moving classified capability hardware out of the American defense system for 19 consecutive months. The supply sergeant's name was Master Sergeant Daniel Reyes, 41 years old, 16 years in Army logistics. He worked out of a windowless office at Fort Huachuca in southern Arizona, processing inbound shipments of unmanned aerial system subsystems. The job was quiet, the paperwork was constant. The expectation was simple: count, log, verify, sign. On the morning of September 4th, 2025, Reyes opened a routine inbound shipment listed as 48 gimbal stabilizers. The crate contained 46, 2 missing. Reyes did what the regulations required. He recounted twice. He photographed the contents on the depot floor. He filed a standard Form 364 discrepancy report. The procedure called for an investigation by the receiving NCO and a written explanation within 72 hours. The explanation came back the next morning. Manufacturing variance, accepted as shipped, signed by a Captain Reyes had worked under for 11 months. Reyes did not accept it. He pulled the prior 6 months of inbound manifests. He cross-referenced them against the depot's outbound logs and the Defense Contract Management Agency verification reports. He worked the math at his kitchen table for 3 nights straight. Across 23 separate shipments, the depot had received between 2 and 6 fewer components than the manifests listed. Total missing, 91 units. Estimated value at government cost, $14.3 million. The variance had been documented every time, signed off every time, by 3 different officers in the same receiving office. Reyes was looking at a pattern. I spent hours going through the public DoD Inspector General filings that surfaced after this case broke, and one detail kept nagging me. The flagged variances never crossed a single threshold that would trigger an automatic upstream audit. Every shipment came in just under the dollar amount that would mandate a Defense Contract Management Agency review. Whoever was running this knew the audit flaws down to the cent. That is not coincidence. That is design. That is what told Reyes he was not looking at a clerical mistake. On September 19th, he walked into the office of the base provost marshal with a folder containing 42 pages of cross-reference documents and time-stamped photographs. He did not file the complaint through his chain of command. He went around it. That decision saved the case. It may have also saved his life. The provost marshal forwarded the file to Army Criminal Investigation Division. CID forwarded it to ATF Phoenix and FBI Counterintelligence within 72 hours. By October 2nd, a joint federal task force was operating under the case name Operation Hollow Crate. The first thing the task force did was put Reyes under quiet protection, plainclothes surveillance on his commute, a swapped vehicle, a short list of officers on base authorized to know where he was. The official cover story was a temporary medical leave for shoulder rehab. The real reason was simpler. If the network had inside men at Fort Huachuca, Master Sergeant Daniel Reyes was now the most dangerous person in southern Arizona to whoever was running it. The second thing the task force did was follow the missing components. The trace got complicated fast. ATF intelligence ran the serial numbers of the manufacturer's batches. The components were produced at 3 contractors in California, Massachusetts, and South Korea. Once shipped into a military depot, they should have been impossible to trace without insider access. But the network had made one mistake. They had sold a small portion of the diverted inventory on the grey market. 2 gimbal units, identified by partial serials, surfaced at a Defense Electronics Expo in Dubai in July 2025. A British arms compliance officer photographed them on the show floor, suspecting they should not have been there. The photographs sat in a UK intelligence database for 4 months before the task force pulled them through Interpol channels. The vendor at the expo was registered to a shell company in Sharjah. The shell company was wired through a brokerage in Cyprus. The Cyprus brokerage's largest single American client was an import firm in Yuma, Arizona, called Sonora Aerospace Solutions. Sonora Aerospace had been incorporated in March 2024. It had 3 employees on paper. Its stated business was importing agricultural drone parts from Asian manufacturers. Its actual business was something else. The task force ran the company's wire history through Treasury FinCEN, 18 months of activity, 47 inbound transfers, all originating from accounts in the UAE, Turkey, or Cyprus. Total inbound $112 million. Outbound activity went to a network of 17 subsidiary LLCs across Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, each holding a warehouse or a storage facility leased through a third intermediary. The pattern was now visible. Diverted military components were being mixed into commercial warehouses alongside legitimate civilian drone parts, repackaged, relabeled, shipped out under cover of routine commercial export to buyers in the UAE, Turkey, and from there onward. The ultimate destination, in at least 11 confirmed shipping cycles, was Iran. By late November, the task force had identified the network's American operator. His name was Adrian Halevi, 48 years old. Naturalized US citizen, born in Beirut, immigrated in 2003, former defense procurement consultant who had lost his security clearance in 2021 after an unrelated financial audit. No criminal record. A comfortable house in Scottsdale, a black Range Rover, roughly $640,000 a year off the legitimate import side of his business. The illegal side was, by ATF's working estimate, between 8 and 12 times that. The task force had a name, they had a network, they had a wire trail. What they did not have yet was the inside man at Fort Huachuca. Then the case nearly died. On December 11th, a winter storm system rolled across the southern desert. Wind speeds hit 60 miles per hour. ATF surveillance had been running a continuous fixed camera operation on the largest of Sonora Aerospace's warehouses, the 40,000 square foot facility off Avenue B in Yuma. The storm took down the primary feed for 6 hours. Backup cameras caught only 1/3 of the loading dock. During those 6 hours, a truck arrived, loaded and left. The task force did not know what was on it. They did not know where it went. The license plate the backup camera partially captured was registered to a Delaware LLC that had not existed 2 months earlier and would not exist 2 months later. A ghost vendor, used once. ATF moved up the timeline. The original raid had been planned for late February. The team accelerated to early February, then to mid-February when intelligence picked up signal traffic indicating a major outbound shipment was being staged. The accelerated timeline carried a real cost. They would have to move on the warehouses without identifying the Fort Huachuca insider first. That risked tipping him off when the warehouse raids hit the news cycle. He could destroy records, he could vanish. The team decided the risk was worth taking. The components were leaving the country. The surprising thing about this case is not the size of the network, it is how routine the diversion looked from outside. Every shipment matched a real procurement order. Every variance fit inside accepted tolerances. Every wire transfer was supported by a manufactured invoice trail. The whole operation was engineered to look exactly like the boring background noise of military logistics paperwork. And it worked for 19 consecutive months. It only failed because one man at the bottom of the chain refused to sign a form. On February 18th at 3:42 a.m., 6 simultaneous federal raids hit Yuma, Phoenix, Tucson, El Paso, Las Cruces, and Sierra Vista. The primary target was the warehouse off Avenue B. 22 ATF agents stacked outside the loading dock, backed by FBI Phoenix Tactical and Arizona Department of Public Safety. They went through the bay doors at 3:44 a.m. exactly. Inside, 3 workers were running a forklift, prepping a 40-foot intermodal container for transit. The container manifest said agricultural sensors bound for Long Beach. The contents were 340 military-grade drone components in foam-cut transit cases. The container was scheduled to leave Yuma on a flatbed at 6 a.m. The workers surrendered without resistance. One of them was eating a breakfast burrito when the breach team came through. Adrian Halevi was arrested at his Scottsdale residence at 3:51 a.m. in his bathrobe, in front of a $30,000 espresso machine. He requested counsel and said nothing. The simultaneous raids hit 13 additional locations. ATF and FBI agents seized 2,100 components in total, 43 vehicles, $4.7 million in cash from 3 separate safes, encrypted laptops, a server room, and a small library of burner phones still in their original packaging. DoD's cyber forensics is still working through the data 6 months later. Will American military equipment continue to be diverted to adversaries through commercial cutouts in the next 5 years? Comment yes or no. We read every reply on this channel. The hardest part of the case came after the raids were over. The Fort Huachuca insider had to be identified, and the task force had a window of about 72 hours before Halevi's arrest hit the wires. Once it hit the wires, anyone still inside could shred records, sanitize devices, or simply disappear into the desert. CID and FBI Counterintelligence ran parallel interviews of every officer who had signed a variance on a flagged shipment. 12 people, across 3 offices, 17 separate interview rooms running simultaneously across 2 days. The break came from a financial subpoena, not an interview. One of the 12 officers had received 7 wire transfers totaling $340,000 over 14 months, routed through a personal LLC registered in Nevada. The LLC's only client was a marketing consultancy that did not appear to exist outside of paperwork filed in 3 states. That marketing consultancy's only client was Sonora Aerospace. The officer was a captain in the receiving NCO chain, 43 years old. 2 combat deployments, a wife, 2 children, and a mortgage in Sierra Vista that was 4 months behind. He was arrested on February 21st, 3 days after the warehouse raids. He cooperated within 48 hours of arrest. Here is the take that will probably draw heat in the comments. The captain who took $340,000 to look the other way was not the villain of this story. He was a symptom. The villain was a procurement and audit system that lets 19-month diversion operations run inside its own walls because every red flag falls just under a threshold. The threshold itself is the failure. As long as the dollar floors for automatic upstream audits are publicly known and rounded to convenient numbers, sophisticated diversion networks will price their thefts to fit inside the gap. That is not the captain's fault alone. That is the architecture's fault. The timing of the larger pattern matters. This network started moving components in mid-2024, scaled hard through 2025, and was preparing its largest shipment to date in February 2026. The escalation curve matches a buyer with growing operational demand. ATF's working assessment, redacted but partially public in the indictment, indicates the components recovered in Yuma had been ordered against a specific list. Someone overseas had a shopping list. The network had been filling it for 19 months. Halevi was charged on 27 federal counts, including export control violations under the Arms Export Control Act, conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and material support to a state sponsor of terrorism. The captain was charged separately under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and federal export statutes. 3 additional Sonora Aerospace employees pleaded out within 90 days of the raids and are cooperating against Halevi. The unresolved part is the network outside the United States. The shell companies in Sharjah and Dubai continue to operate under reorganized names. The brokerage in Cyprus has been sanctioned but not dismantled. At least 2 of Halevi's senior overseas contacts, identified through wire records and a single recovered phone, have not been located. One of them, identified in the public indictment only as a Lebanese national operating under 3 known aliases, was last placed in Istanbul in mid-January and has not been seen since. There is also the question of what was on the truck that left the warehouse during the December 11th storm. ATF still does not know. 6 hours of camera footage is missing. Whatever was loaded into that truck between roughly 1 a.m. and 7 a.m. was already outside the country before the raids ever began. Estimated value of those components, based on the inventory gaps reconstructed afterward against the depot ledgers, between $7 million and $11 million. They are somewhere, operating presumably in a weapons program that the United States is paying billions of dollars to defend against. Master Sergeant Daniel Reyes received a citation for meritorious service in March 2026. He declined a lateral transfer offered to him by Army Logistics Command and asked to stay at Fort Huachuca. The base added a second verification officer to his receiving line and rewrote the variance reporting protocol from the depot floor up. The audit floors were lowered. The new thresholds were classified. Reyes still works in the same windowless office. He still counts. He still signs. Sometimes the system fails because the people inside it are corrupt. Sometimes the system works because one man, with no obvious incentive to do so, decides that 2 missing units out of 48 matter enough to write down. That is the small thing this case turned on. 2 gimbals out of 48. A 4.2% discrepancy that anyone in that office could have buried in 90 seconds. The network is dismantled. The captain is awaiting sentencing. Adrian Halevi is in pre-trial detention at the federal facility in Florence, Arizona, with a trial date currently set for late autumn. The buyer is still buying. Subscribe so you do not miss what the rest of this network looks like when it surfaces, because it will. Networks like this never end with a raid. They pause, they rebuild, they come back through different shell companies, with different American faces in front, in different states, drawing from the same overseas demand. The components keep moving. The demand does not stop. It only changes address.